Please welcome Pat Washington, Vice President of the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis and sponsor of today's conference, to introduce our next exciting workshop. Pat?
Thank you. They let me come up on stage and everything. I absolutely love that. Good morning. This has been wonderful. I've only been here a few minutes, so just for those who've been participating in the conference longer than the 20 minutes that I've been here, I can't imagine how full you are and how overwhelmed you are and how nourished you've become. So, because just being in the room, it's been wonderful. So thank you, Vincent, and good morning. I'm happy to be here on behalf of the Urban League of Metropolitan St. Louis. Social equity and civil rights are at the heart of the Urban League's mission and vision. So we're delighted to support Webster's DEI conference and help bring more folks along in the work toward a more inclusive and equitable community. Our next session is titled Balm, the Emerging Field of Community Healing. And I can tell you that you're in for a treat because our moderator is none other than just the one and only inimitable Rebeccah Bennett. She's founder and principal of Emerging Wisdom and InPower Institute. Let me just share a little personal note, because you can't have an encounter with Rebeccah Bennett and her team at Emerging Wisdom and not feel healed, not feel nourished, not feel as though some sort of calming wave has washed over you. And she just gets to the core and brings out the very best in you, no matter what your perspective, no matter what your beliefs, no matter where she encounters you or meets you, you are always taken to a higher place when you exchange with Rebeccah Bennett and the good folks at Emerging Wisdom. So get ready, hold on to your seats, and be ready for this nourishing session. Rebeccah will be joined by her partners at InPower Institute, Dr. April Warren Grice, Reverend Gabrielle Kennedy, and I believe I'm saying this, Adande, I love that, Adande Lane and Brittany Gray. Please join me in welcoming them to our DEI conference. Thank you.
I love you too. Good morning. Ooh, say it like you mean it. Is it a good morning? You know what I'm saying? It's like 70 degrees outside. It's a good morning. For this young lady who loves to, whose idea of a vacation is traveling around the world and chasing the sun. Oh, so I am so glad that there is so much energy and enthusiasm and interest in this emerging field of community healing. I'm heartened by your presence and by the presence of so many others who are joining us online. And as is the custom in my culture, I'm going to root in those you cannot see. So you see 5 of us here, and these are amazing and extraordinary soul beings. This is true. But behind us, there are millions. All of those who we come from, whose experiences, sacrifices, presences, livelihoods, insights, lessons learned created the fertile ground for us to be. And so I'll begin simply by calling upon some of their names as a part of opening the way for whatever wants to happen. I call on Mama Harriet. Some of you know her by her last name, Tubman. I call on Sojourner Truth, who had the ability to speak truth to power before there was such a phrase. I call on Mary Church Terrell, who was a master organizer in this change and transformation work. I call on Bridget Biddy Mason, who through her own suffering and pain and her willingness to fight the system, got her freedom and the freedom for her progeny in 1851. I call on Ruby Taylor and Anna Mills Chester, who are my personal grandmothers in this life. I call on Annie Malone, who is a great mother of this community, who through her business acumen and charitable contributions helped build St. Louis as we know it. I call on Mary McLeod Bethune, fantastic educator, right, who believed that education was a pathway to liberation. There are so many others who I could call on, but I invite our foremothers to be with us today in this work. Now, this is a DEI conference, and we are educators, consultants, coaches, ministers, organizers, activists, artists. We are all of these things, and we have deep and abiding bodies of work in our respective disciplines, advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, opportunity in our respective fields. But what holds us together isn't the work at the surface. What holds us together is a deep and abiding sense that we have to be accountable to that which is beneath the surface. That every strategy, every structure, every process, every effort to dismantle, every effort to create anew will be constrained by the extent to which we heal or don't heal our species' addiction to dominion. And if we don't do that work, then our efforts will surely be in vain. Why? Because we will repeat the conditioned patterns that have wounded us so. And so it's that spirit that we bring into our conversation today. So I want you to get a sense of who's with me. Now I'm supposed to have a clicker. Wait, what I'm supposed to do, Vincent? Help me out. All right. Thank you. We were so excited to get on the stage. Wait now, for the technology challenge. Okay, forward and backwards. All right, I can do this. Right, so I want you to know who's with me here, my sisters in this purpose and in this community. We've got to my left, Brittini Gray, who is yeah, you can clap. You can clap. Yes. This sister is a social entrepreneur. She's the founder of Rebellion, LLC, a consulting and wellness firm, and Mama Scraps, Inc., a nonprofit committed to the healing of both the people and the land. She's also our organizing director for the Black Healers Collective, and is a multi-methodology modality healer and wellness curator, ritualist, artist, certified doula, and former community organizer. So welcome, Brittini. To her left is Reverend Gabrielle Kennedy, who's a native of North St. Louis, pastor of Buren Chapel, African Methodist Episcopal Church, and the interim executive director of a wonderful organization in our region called Faith Heals. She's dedicated to a ministry of social justice and has worked with multiple civic organizations committed to racial, gender, and economic equity. She believes in the embodied work of her ministry through community collaboration. In the areas of health equity, healing practices, and liturgical leadership. Welcome, Reverend Gabrielle Kennedy. To her left is Adonde Lane, a healer, coach, spiritual advocate, and holy ratchinista. Now, you might not even know what that is. Okay, but that is, we can upset some things. We can complicate even our theological foundations if it aids and abets our healing. She has over a decade of experience in character development and transformational coaching with individuals and organizations. She's the founder of the InPower She Network and curates safe spaces to be and become in purpose, with purpose, and on purpose. Welcome, Adonde Lane. And lastly, to her left is Dr. April Warren Grice. She's the founder and CEO of Liberated Genius, an education consulting company, and as an academic, serves as the Dean's Equity Scholar in Residence at the University of Pittsburgh, a School of Education, and as a lecturer here at Washington University. Join me in welcoming Dr. April Warren Grice. All right, we got the formalities out the way, right? This is who is in the room, who is on the stage sharing with you from our experiences. What binds us together is this commitment to community healing. What we're going to do and share with you on this day and why we are gathered on this day. And I'm going to take a moment and say thank you, Vincent, for inviting us. Thank you, Kate, for having us. A good housekeeping is to acknowledge our hosts. So we're grateful to be here. But we have 4 aims in our time together today. We want to share with you what we're learning from what we're calling an emerging field of community healing. We want to grow interest and participation in this work because we think that this work is among the most transformative that our species can undertake and engage in, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say it. We want to validate your sense, because you're here, that there is something more that is needed from our efforts than conventional practice and conventional strategy. Those things might be important and they might be necessary, but they are not sufficient if we don't get at that more. So we want to stoke the fire in your sense of more. And we want to affirm that healing together is necessary and it's all possible. It's possible. We have to start somewhere. And if we don't believe it's possible, what ends up happening is we don't do it. We don't even try, which compounds the likelihood that we'll never live it. And as someone who has little people, I can't afford that position. I can't afford that posture in this life. So we're telling you a little bit about us. We're going to give you some stories about our origins in the work. We're going to share with you an evolving understanding of the field. So that's a little bit of theory because community healing might evoke different things for different people. I'm not sure what frame of reference you bring, and we ourselves have a variety of perspectives and frames. And so what we're going to attempt to do is to provide a shared platform for understanding what this work is. And then we're going to tell you about how we've been applying it. We're going to share some stories from the front lines of our work so that you can see that it is appropriate and useful in a variety of contexts and situations, lest you think that healing is the thing that only happens on the weekend or only happens in safe and comfortable spaces. And we're going to open up the floor for question and answer. At the end of our time together, we've got a gift for you. So we've got a starter healing guide online that you can access. So we'll give you a link to that so that you can access it, download it, and use it as you prepare to do healing work, as you leave healing work. It's also an invitation for you to stay connected to us as we continue to do this work both here and around the country. So we've got a gift, and we ask that you stay with us in this process. So I want to open the floor up by telling you how we come at this work, and I'm going to have each of my sisters in the work do the same. Some of you know that I worked with the Ferguson Commission at its beginning. It was a client of mine. I was charged with doing all of its community engagement for its first 4 months. And for those of you who are joining us who are not from the region, on August 9th of 2014, a young man by the name of Michael Brown was killed by a white police officer. And so this started or sparked a racial conflagration, the likes of which we hadn't seen since the civil rights movement of the 60s, and the likes of which would be amplified in the killing of George Floyd. But in this moment, in the very first meeting that we had more than 450 community members come out. We had 40 TV and camera crews from all over the country with us. Everything that we did was sunshineable. The governor had appointed a committee of volunteers to consider the root causes of disparity that led to the racial conflagration that we were experiencing, that led to the protests and the uprising. And so these volunteers got together in front of the community to listen and to learn. And as a part of that process, I got a chance to help them begin the journey, to facilitate this process publicly. And in the first meeting, we spent the first couple of hours talking through the mandate and what we were required to do and going through policy and procedure and trying to figure out what our priorities were. And about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours into the process, a woman stands up and she says, "They're killing our babies." And you're talking about policy and procedure. They're killing our babies. It was a moment. You feel it? It's a moment right now. What she was saying to us is that you're attempting to fix something that you are too scared to acknowledge the suffering from. How dare you try to fix something when no one is speaking to the ways in which we feel endangered each and every day? What she was saying is, I need you to be accountable to more than the governor. I need you to be accountable to murdered children, women, and men. I need you to understand the cost and the loss. I need you to root in something real. She was saying, you can't fix it if you don't heal it. You can't fix it if you don't heal it. You can't fix it if you don't heal it. And so we got from around the table, we leaned into community, we sat down, we moved the chairs, we opened the floor for people to share, to begin to tell the ways in which they were feeling endangered, to talk about the toll and the cost. We shared ourselves so that we weren't just disinterested observers. And it changed things. We cried together, we prayed together, and then we changed our process. From every single meeting forward, we had an opportunity for story, for experience, for public witnessing of pain, and it actually helped us in developing better solutions with our community. You all know the end of this story. We had 189 recommendations and 47 signature priorities that have now been worked on by several hundred organizations over the last 7 years. But we couldn't have gotten there if she didn't ask us to do a deeper work. That was how I got deeply in. Brittini?
Whew. Girl, I'm over there trying to hold it in. So 5 years ago, right around this time, I was on sabbatical, writing my thesis for Eden right across the lawn on white supremacy in the Black church and what it meant for the Black church to become a resource of healing for activists and organizers. I found myself on the front lines of Ferguson, and with my organizational work, took up some of those priorities that you spoke about, specifically as it related to out-of-school suspensions. And I was exhausted. And all of my colleagues were exhausted. And everybody I know who has been on the front lines was, and many still are, purely exhausted. There has to be a better way for us to engage in this work of justice, in this work of transformation, that does not deplete those that are committing their lives to it. And so while I was working on that thesis, I'll be honest, it was not the best thing I wrote because we did not have the language or the field to talk about what community healing looked like. And so that was kind of the last straw for me, but it probably began a year before Ferguson ever happened, when I first started organizing and realized that we needed spaces where we could unplug, where we could decompress, where we could deal with the traumas of the work in a way that allowed for us to be sustained for the long term. We talked about the ancestors as we opened up, and I look at our elders and I'm like, how did they do it? Clearly there had to have been tools and resources that they tapped into that have sustained them. Harry Belafonte just celebrated 95 years of life. You don't get to 95 unless you got something that sustains you.
That's right. That's right.
And so my work became much more intentional, and I transitioned from Eden and from organizing to InPower Institute, where I felt like I could have the space to dedicate my life to this query of how do we heal in community.
Yes. Ashe.
Ashe and amen. I came to community healing out of a grounding, out of the reality that I grew up on the north side in the truest sense of a village raising a child, is how I like to describe it. My sister and I were not raised by our parents, but instead, our family on both sides, my mother and my father's side of the family, took a deep interest, commitment, and investment in rearing us. And I don't mean just in a, we're going to give them just what they need sense, but in a sense that I was privately school educated my whole life. And mother and father's side, and to be honest with you, they ain't even like each other. I mean, that's real, right? Like, they didn't like each other, but they loved us. And liking each other wasn't the point. I've seen that message come back to me. It circled back around to me recently. We'll talk about that later. But since then, every time I get an opportunity to engage, this place, this lens of communal being always draws me in. And so everything in my life, as growing up, I love team sports, right? I love choral singing, right? I love my sister circles. Yeah. I like to be amongst people. I like being in a cohort. That's where I first met Rebeccah. So being able to identify the diversity of the human spirit and of human talent and skill is a draw for me. And I believe it grows out of this clannish kind of upbringing that I had with people who were far and deep, but had something in common. And the thing they had in common was my well-being. And so community healing just seemed to make sense to me. Hence, I became, for all practical purposes, I am a priest. I have priestly duties. As a pastor, I'm both a congregational and a communal pastor, right? And so, so when the pandemic hit, and in my work of raising the awareness about disparities in health equity, I could see it playing out in front of us. All that stuff we had been telling people, you know, for the sake of our report, all that stuff, it was playing out in front of us, again, in real time. And we saw this groundswell of community interest and concern, and allowed us to be able to say, okay, so if the government can't do it, if y'all can't figure it out, then let us figure it out for us, for our own selves. Amen. So I'm going to be able to give you the rest of that story a little bit later, but that's how I came into community healing and began to not just see it on a communal level, but then to internalize that as I encountered the Black Healers Collective.
Yes.
To be continued.
Ashe. Come back to you all. There we go.
I am reminded that there are many routes that we all have found ourselves in this work. And my story begins a little bit earlier, when I was about 13 years old and encountered an incident, a traumatic incident, if you will, that challenged my ability to see myself as whole. It challenged my sense of worth, my ability to envision my life beyond a point. And healing began literally with me in my mother's arms, me crying, her crying, because she did not know how to tend to my wounds, these deep wounds. So my mother invited others into my healing community. She connected me with others who could talk with me, who could understand, who could connect with me. And I began to see at that moment that healing is grounded and rooted in our relationships with others. I also saw myself as transformed. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It is a process. As I engaged with others, I saw myself as a source of healing for my peers. I became that friend that people came to when they didn't know what was going on. I became that person to talk through if you just needed to throw some ideas against the wall. I became that person to hold space. I didn't have that wording then, but I became that person. And I began to see that by bridging these energies, by creating spaces where multiple people were coming together to understand that we have a shared experience, we elevate and ignite that energy. Positive energy is catching. It is illuminating. It helps us see those other tender spaces. When I began a professional career, I saw in a high school in Las Vegas young men and young women who were struggling and did not have someone to speak with, did not have an outlet, did not have someone to listen, to hear, to hold space. So I became that space. My office became that space. I began to curate spaces for young people to come in and just talk. We just rapped, which then turned into building curriculum around transformation, healing, development that is rooted in shared experience and that thrives on community. Yeah. I didn't understand it as community healing then. I saw it as a collective, how we were helping each other. They helped me, my God. Did they help me to see myself in them, for me to see them in me? When I answered a call to ministry, it was because I knew that I like to shake things up a little bit. My name literally means the challenger. So there's a pushback that we will talk about a little bit later when I see how we are utilizing our spiritual formation and what that does when we are attempting to heal collectively and how we might reorganize. But I stepped further into that work and found a home at InPower so that I could do the creative work in the community without concern of being limited in ways that challenges our ability to, again, see ourselves as whole. Yes. This is a practiced work. Yes. We don't get it right, but we keep stepping.
Yes, yes, I share. Y'all don't have to be quiet, by the way. You know what I mean? If you feel moved.
Oh, I am so moved by each of my sister's experiences here. And then as I was thinking about my own story, I was like, well, actually, I got a piece of that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. So I'm going to start, before I start, because you just actually reminded me. I used to be a teacher, high school English teacher, basketball coach, and a program director at Rittner High School. And there I worked with a team of teachers. It was 2 Black teachers and a Latinx teacher. And together we worked to program activities for Black and Latinx students so that they could see themselves beyond the high school experience. And we literally would stay sometimes until 9 p.m. And I was single at the time, and I'd be like, hey, Peterson, you actually got a wife and kids, you need to get home. But we would be planning because we were just so involved and like, oh my God, this is gonna be so fun. This is gonna be so great for them. It was just a great opportunity to work in Village with folks who were dedicated to our sisters, who were our children, who put them at the forefront. And it was exciting. So then when I went off to get my PhD, I was like, there had to be other programs like mine. Like there just had to be. And so I wanted to study programs like that. And so for my PhD, I studied organizations that supported Black and or Latinx students in high school in the Midwest. And so I only found like a number of them, and some of them actually, like if an administrator moved schools, then that program went with them. So there was about 6. And when I interviewed them, one of the other things I did beyond interview them was I held a focus group. And when that focus group, of course, I was just looking, okay, all right, let's tell me your experiences. What has it been like? And in doing so, they were talking about the experiences they had doing this work. And what I soon realized was that there was a cost to pursuing equity. There was the additional workload because they also had to They had to mentor all the students that had been ignored. They had to act as counselors because the counselors were ignoring them or telling them, yeah, you can just, McDonald's is for you. There was also the lack of support that they found. And so they had to pay for things out of their pockets. They had to create space for them. Then there was also the professional attacks. For one of the principals, she was accused of changing the percentages of the attendance rates, because at this point, the rate had surpassed that of white students. And she was accused of that. Then they also had to navigate just this race work because their job was on the line, because they were threatened with their jobs. And in that focus group, I looked around and they were just very tense. And I was like, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your stress like right now? And this was just them remembering it. And they was like, it's off the chart. It's 10, it's 20. It's out of control right now. I'm just getting hot just thinking about it. And I was like, oh my gosh. Because what they were they were feeling physical results of the stress that they were enduring. They had physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and just an overall sense of stress. When I realized that, it just made me think to my future work about, if these are the people that are protecting and serving our students who are historically marginalized, and they are the ones that are doing this work, wow, how much more powerful could we be if we were really well?
Hello.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Hello.
Yeah.
How much more powerful could we be if we were really well? How much more powerful could we be if we were well? How much more powerful could we be if we were well? What would the future for our species look like if this particular planet was not the site of 200,000 years of bloody conflict? I mean, at some point we have to evolve as a species. Is this the world that we want our lineages, those who are coming, our progeny, to inherit? And do we have to be bound by the same perennial conflicts? What will it take? What will it take to transform these circumstances and conditions? It will take a transformation of consciousness. This is an inside and outside job. We have to tend to both the core and the conditions. To do one or the other is to do disservice to the whole. And it keeps us stuck in the maladaptive patterns that have defined much of our experience. So this is the part where we want to share with you our understanding. Right? We've told you how we've gotten in, so you can feel the evocative pull of what called us, what pulled at our hearts and our minds and our spirits and said, hey, 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 there's more. There's more for you. There's more for us as a collective. Right? That stimulated our curiosity about how might we come at these challenges differently. And so for the next, we went long, but it was good. For the next 25 minutes, we're going to share with you our working understanding, what we might call theory. Right? We're going to share with you a description of what community healing is. So what do we mean when we use this terminology? We're going to share with you our operating assumptions. There are many, but we will share with you 6. We're going to talk about the essential tools to do the work. Right? So those things that are necessary. There are many, many tools in the toolkit, but what do we absolutely think is integral, that if you don't have it, right, it undermines your ability to be effective? And we're going to talk about some processes for getting started, for those who want to get started in the work, or for those who've been doing the work and you just need validation on process. So when we talk about community healing, what is it that we mean? We have developed a definition from our respective frame of reference together. And what we mean is a healing process that works to make human collectives and the people within them healthy, vital, and well. Everybody with me? It's a healing process, both for the collective and the people within them. So now you're starting to see that it's holistic. We're talking about individual and collective. right? We're actually making a subtle statement there that individual healing work, while it is necessary, is not what? Sufficient. Further, as we understand community healing, it addresses communities' mental, physical, emotional, cultural, and spiritual needs, which include developing responses, communal responses to harm. Communal responses to harm, communal responses to trauma, and doing that at a variety of levels. At the societal level, because we experience harm there, and also in our interpersonal relationships. It is a fiction to think that systemic racism only affects us at the meta level. It shows up in our relationships. Yes, it is structured. Yes, it is institutionalized. Yes, it can be appropriated. But my first experiences of systemic racism might not be a man with a hood and a burning cross. It might be an uncle, a cousin, or aunt who says, you ain't never gonna be shit. I used an expletive, I meant to do so. But where do you think they got that from? You think that was an original thought? Where did they hear serially how unimportant they were to the scheme of things? Were they born with that understanding? Right? So my first experiences with these things happen in the interpersonal, interstitial connections, and they also happen in the meta environment. So community healing works on those levels as well. It is an inside and outside job, and it is a scalable activity, a scalable process. And its practices foster creativity and resilience. Why do we focus on creativity and resilience? Because so much of what hurts us is conditioned behavior. We do it this way because this is the way it's always been done. Or at least that's what we think. How many of our patterns look like that? How much of what you do did you inherit? Those are conditioned responses, not creative ones. Creative responses understand what is happening in the moment, in the now, and are free to respond to that. Conditioned ones just do things a certain way. Right? When we're trying to understand all about implicit bias and other kinds of things, what are we talking about? We're talking about conditioned states of consciousness. So we're talking about creative states of consciousness. I'm telling you that oppression has never been a match for a fully creative human being. Doesn't mean that we'll win. Doesn't mean that we'll live. But it certainly means that we will look for ways to move around, over, under, in, through. Whatever it is that seeks to disable, constrain, confine, limit, reduce, disparage, or kill us. So its practices foster creativity and resilience. They promote life-affirming ways of being in relationship rather than toxic ways of being in relationship. And they advance liberation as an essential condition of human well-being. It's hard to be well when you're not free. I'll say it again. It's hard to be well when you're not free. Come on, say it with me. Come on. It's hard to what?
To be well.
When you're not free. Right? It's a really hard proposition. All this self-care.
Come on.
And I'm a proponent of self-care. I am. But if that self-care is happening within a context that is violating me and perennially endangering me, it's going to be real hard for me to be well. Hence why we focus both on the core and the conditions. Right? So this is what we mean when we talk about community healing. Right? This is the foundation from which we do this work. This is a shared understanding, and we invite you into that shared understanding. Now, two of my European witch women ancestors, love them, Barbara and Monica. They are no longer with us in physical form. They have transitioned from elders to ancestors. I call them witch women because they were women who understood their power, not necessarily because they were practicing Wicca. But oftentimes women who live their power unapologetically are demonized. And they wrote a book called The Great Cosmic Mother. If you haven't read it, it is worth reading. But they make the greatest case for community healing that I have ever encountered in such potent ways. So I'm going to read this. They say, at this point in history, changing the economic social systems alone is not enough. Repressive behavior, sadistic power relations, competitive greed to exploit, dominate, and humiliate, and our accommodations to these insults are by now conditioned into the nervous systems of each member of our civilized societies. Both oppressors and victims are damaged by the experience. It's hardwired into our nervous systems. The repressive wiring of the nervous system occurs at the most intimate levels of our being. And so I'm asking you, do you think conversation is enough? Like, we got to get in there. The recreation of the human being must occur on these levels also if we desire a truly human revolution, one that does more than change the guard. Right? And in this United States of America experiment, we can relate to that. Right? I think it's so beautiful. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are what? Created equal. And then we went right back around and created a constitution, right? Later on, Article 2, right? That talks about certain people being 3/5 of a person. These same people who wrote, all men are created equal. Right? Why? Because they were fleeing persecution, and many of them, and they had experienced great pain and trauma. Yes, of being in a caste system, in this case, a feudal and economic caste system. And then, because it didn't get healed, what did they do? They recreated a caste system, this time on race, on gender, and on class. Right? If we want to really change the guard, we're going to have to do something different. Why does this work matter? They explained it. But now we've got more to say about it.
The first one is we can't fix what we don't heal. This is another way of encouraging radical courage, required to clearly identify our individual and collective wounds. Only by facing the wounds, the tenderness, can we then heal it? It says we can patch up our problems, but we cannot resolve the underlying issues without becoming accountable to what rests beneath the surface of our experiences, patterned behaviors and conditions. Only by facing and tending the hurt, the sense of shame, other self-conscious emotions can we truly shift the systems driven by our collective behaviors. Albert Einstein says it like this: the consciousness that created our problems will not be the one that solves them.
Whatever we don't heal, we spread. It's a popular fiction that we can contain our hurts. Pain is sticky and hurt leaks. Yeah, I like that. It matches up with what drew me into this community healing process. Reading and listening to Resma Menakem in his My Grandmother's Hands really resonated with me. And it helped me to see that it wasn't just this kind of airy pie in the sky feeling thing that sometimes we get the sense of as we talk about community healing, but the physiological manifestation of trauma in our bodies affects each other. Right? And so it makes sense, through my lens at least, of communal being, that I would respond, and I'm hoping that you will too, that whatever we don't heal, we spread. That means like, now it's not just about me. Like, I got responsibility for the rest of these people that I interact with. Both spiritually, I'm concerned about that as a pastor and as a priest, but also physically, because what I'm feeling, they can feel. Because really there is no separation between us. Whatever we don't heal, we spread.
Yes. We get hurt in community because of that spread. Like, let's be very clear. We spread, we get hurt, so we have to heal in community. It is absolutely insufficient to think that we should handle address and resolve all of our hurts by ourselves.
Say that one
It's
more
too
again.
heavy. I can't. You know I don't recall stuff. It come out and it's gone.
Just say it again. Say it again.
We can't do it alone. It's too much. It's too heavy. And it's not all of ours to bear. So we heal in community. Our relationships and interactions have often been major conduits for the harms that we experience. With intention, key word here, they can become the channels for healing. That's enough.
She said it again. I'm gonna just jump in for a minute right there and say what my grandmother says. She used to say, life doesn't give you more than you can handle. I love my grandmother. She's been an ancestor for 20 years. You heard me call upon her. But I'm gonna say this, that's bullshit. Right? The only way that aphorism is actually true is if the second you is plural. Life doesn't give you, singular, more than you collectively can handle.
That's right.
Because life has certainly given me more than I can handle at times.
Every day.
But in connection, in relationship, in community, somehow I'm able to tap into something that enables me to take the next breath. We get hurt in community, we gotta heal in it.
We have to do it together. We have to do it together because I too have had too much that I couldn't handle by myself, but together we are much better. And our last point is, in this era of pandemics, whether it's COVID-19, racism, economics, and rapidly escalating climate change. I mean, it's what, 70 degrees outside right now in St. Louis, Missouri? We're in for a tsunami of trauma. And we need every faculty of healing to not only survive, but to avoid recreating those patterns and to thrive. Because there's a difference between surviving and thriving. Like I mentioned in my story, those educators, they were surviving. But I wondered, what would it be like to actually thrive? And there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
Indeed. I think it bears pulling this out for a minute as we talk about the ways in which we advance diversity and equity and inclusion. And I want to pull out, pull out how white supremacy culture impacts how we come at healing. I hadn't planned to say this, but I'm gonna say it because we're here. Right? I believe that our dominion has resulted in confusion. Right? So in systems and structures of dominion where there are those who rule and have power concentrated, and then everyone else in varying strata, those who are in dominion often operate under the confusion that they can do it by themselves. On the top of the heap. Right? Whatever it is. It's like, I don't need anybody. That's a confusion of a structure called dominion. Because what dominion does is it pulls us out of relationship. Right? It creates a fiction. That hierarchy separates from the tribe, separates from the community, and that separation also creates isolation. And that isolated perspective then has the sense that they by themselves are sufficient unto themselves. Because they have an aggregation of power. And so then that mindset then shows up as a sense that I should be able to be well by myself. I've got everything I need. So I want to say it's not our fault that we end up getting into these patterns, but it is our work to decide to do something else. When we are not operating under a framework, a mental model of dominion and separation, but one of embedded community, Embedded community has a radically different sense, not only of our accountability to one another, but of our connection and our need for one another. What I'm saying to you is that the sense that the individual can do it alone is a byproduct of compounded privilege.
Repeat, run that back.
I don't know what I said. Right? But it's a byproduct of privilege. The more privileged we are, the less we believe that we need others for our survival.
That's right. That's it.
So in cultures that have experienced a disproportionate amount of dominion, and I'm using this language on purpose, right? Because you could take dominion and find it in many places across this globe. There's often a sense of, I've got this. And I'm saying, you don't. I don't. We don't.
Because if you did, we'd be much further already. It'd be done.
Hello.
Yeah, there it is.
We wouldn't be here. Okay. So some of our operating assumptions.
So, operating assumptions. Number one, community healing is old work, but a relatively new field of practice in the U.S., right? So for as long as there have been human communities, and I love this language that we are promoting here, human communities, right? Because in my work, oftentimes we've been reduced to racial, right? Or gender orientation. But if we would just focus on the fact that this is a human problem, we've all been traumatized. And we all now have an opportunity, as we always have, to heal it. And so it's always been the work that we should have been doing. And so this is an opportunity for us to do that. However, the history is that we have been concentrating on healthcare delivery. We've been concentrating on specific areas, mental health and behavioral health. But we haven't been, which has its own kind of dominion kind of positioning, right? That mostly that is in something that's been concentrated in how men are delivering that system. Communal, when you start talking about healing, that is in many ways connected to the work of women. Hence, in our society, in this, especially in this Western society, it has lost its value and its power. We are claiming that back. We're claiming that value back. Community healing can be supported by specialized expertise, just like we talked about, therapists and ministers and medical care providers, but it also should be claimed by us. But we are assuming, our second assumption is that there's a specialized place, that you have to be this kind of person in order to heal. And what we're saying is that all of us can claim it together. Community healing cannot be done for communities. To be effective, it must be rooted in and led and supported by those who are its focus. What does that mean? That means it must be rooted in and led by those who will benefit from it. Who's going to benefit from it? Y'all can answer that question. Who's going to benefit? We all will. We all will benefit. And even if you're not, you don't have to be ordained. You don't have to be a PhD. You don't have to be an MD in order to be a part of the healing practice.
By virtue of being alive, you've had to heal something. All living beings, right? Healing is a property of aliveness, right? How do species, how do living organisms, how do they sustain themselves as they come into experiences of harm or degraded environment or connection, right? They have properties of healing. And there are autonomic properties of healing. You stub your toe, you didn't tell your toe how to fix the broken blood vessels, but it happens. And then there are the conscious efforts that we engage in to heal, right? And so by virtue of being alive, we've had to heal something physically, emotionally, and other kinds of ways. It doesn't mean that we are necessarily consider ourselves to be experts or healers, but it is to say that every single human being has some experience of healing in some way, which means that we can all participate. Community healing is a democratic field, that makes use of experts. Experts are useful, particularly because they hold specialized knowledge, but that says that that by itself is not sufficient. Are we going to have therapists and physicians and ministers get us out of all of the mess that we're in? The answer is no. They can be of service, but to think that they in and of themselves are going to help us maintain the well-being of ourselves every single day is too much. We have the ability to consciously engage in our well-being, in our restoration, in our rest, and in our repair.
Community healing is multidisciplinary, multidimensional. It rejects single prescriptions for change as reductionist and controlling. There are many pathways to healing. Now, if you're like me, which I imagine you are, you just want the silver bullet. I know I do. However, that's just false. There is no silver bullet, but instead it's many pathways. As we've demonstrated here, we're all taking a different role and different approach. Number 5, the people in our communities with the most potent healing medicines are usually those who have experienced, persevered and grown through severe wounding. Whenever I put on conferences, I always bring all the stakeholders together because I'm like, there's more genius in the room than just in one of us. Yeah. And those people that have experienced it, they need to be at the table as opposed to someone else saying, this is what you need. And instead, this is what we need. Yeah. Number 6, community healing is not the work of a single lifetime, but of every generation. Mm-hmm. Where we would hurry, it invites us to linger, seeking new and different perspectives and the wisdom of our roots. I one time asked my therapist, I'm like, man, when am I just gonna be over this thing? I just wanna be over it. And he said, you know, with every new time that you think about it, you'll just look at it from a different layer. So you'll grow and use that wisdom. There's this thing called Sankofa, and it reminds us to go back to the past and bring forth the wisdom that we've gained to address what's going on now.
All right, y'all. This is the real question. How do we do this? And I want to say something real quick before I get into my slide because it's eating at me. There's a school of thought that says that part of our evolution as human beings, as the dominant one in the food kingdom, is not about our perceived intelligence as it would exist in books and all of that, but is more so about our ability to help each other. That if a bird broke its wing, another bird don't necessarily have the skill sets to help it. But we can fix broken bones and broken spirits as people. It's communal. At the root of who we are as an quote unquote evolved species is communal. So when we enter into doing this work, we have to root in that. Now, I'm saying this because I love Palo Santo and sage, and I got my essential oils and all of that, and that's beautiful. And it's great stuff to have. I use it a lot. But if I ain't had none of that, we could still be healing. Okay? And this is about making it accessible. Because sometimes when we have those things, and in white dominant culture, what has traditionally been true of wellness and healing spaces is that they have been inaccessible to people without the means and resources to get into them. So we moving all of that out the way, and we saying who can do this and how can you do it? Everybody can do it.
Yes.
And you do it by using the most fundamental resources that we have. The first one is clear purpose. We don't enter into this work without knowing what it is that we have come to do. Purpose. Why are we together? Quality presence. This goes back to where I started at about our evolution. How we are together determines how well we heal together. We don't take enough time for that, especially in this day and age. Everything is so transactional. Got to get here, got to be there, got to do this, got to do that. Quality presence requires our undivided attention and our connection from spirit to spirit.
Yeah. That's good.
The next part is authentic relationship. Key word there being authentic. If you're not really in this for the right reasons, you might not be ready to heal. And that's okay. But let's be honest about it. We come together and we root in our understanding that we need to deepen and develop and repair and transform. And we do that by being truthful, by being vulnerable. Now later we're going to talk about how we moving this forward. And part of this is how we heal at work. This is very antithetical to what is traditionally in our work environments. You don't come to work to be vulnerable. What we're saying is that if you want to heal, you do. And we come with respect and care. We are willing to sit in the discomfort. Because this stuff ain't easy and it ain't pretty. But we also come with courage and compassion. And we make space for our grief and our joy. Our rage, and our softness. These last two are really important. This is what moves us from just how do we be in good, authentic relationship with one another to how do we move into healing relationship with one another. The first part of that is meaningful ritual and processes. This is about having intentional acts and practices that help us make meaning together. So by ritual, I do not mean what you do consistently every day. I don't mean brushing your teeth. That's not what I'm talking about when I say ritual. What I'm talking about is how we intentionally seek to heal. That is what I'm referring to as ritual. And then the last part of that is a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves. Because we're not enough. So we got to be connected to something else. And I'm not going to determine what that is for you. That might be God. That might be universe. That might be ancestors. That might be your values and the things that help drive you to be a better person. Whatever that is, we root in that. That's what's essential to do this work. Everything else is icing on the cake. I'm done.
Yes. I didn't forget my line, so I'm just going to let you sit with it for a minute. Because there are ways that we often think that how valid a field is, how impactful it is tied to how complicated it is. How many authorized bodies do we have to do it? And we're suggesting something different. We're saying that expertise is useful, but it's supportive. And we're saying that you needn't complicate, though there are layers of complexity in the human experience and relationships. That the most important things for you to have are purpose, shared sense of purpose, an understanding of the context in which you're healing. Is it a classroom? Is it with older adults? Is it with young people? Is it right? What's your context? Right? That's what we're saying. That's what we're saying. Are you in real relationship with the people you want to do healing with? If not, that might not be the container. Right? Do you have a way of making meaning together and tapping into your power? And are you connected to something that funds your work? When I say funds, I don't actually mean finances, right? But that sense of connection to community or all these other things, or to God, or to each other, or to your values, that is something that is a resource that keeps giving, particularly as the work gets harder. You keep coming back to that as fertile ground. So, those are essential tools. Believe us when we say it. That's what we need. That's what we need. Now, there's some processes that we follow, and Adande is going to tell you more about a process that we use to help us get started that might be beneficial to you.
First, I want to raise that you may hear us speak about individual and collective, but one of the most common words that we're using is the word we. We. Me plus you, and all of you, plural. It is important when we say community, communal, the usness, the connectedness, that we come back to that. So even if you hear you, yes, we are speaking to you as an individual, but we are also speaking to you as the collective. We must keep that at the forefront of our mind when we're speaking about this healing. So our process for getting started. First step, prepare yourself to engage. Do more than just show up if possible. Presence is more than just being there. Your presence is the commitment to the present, to being open to the right now. What is happening right now? Sometimes all you can do is show up, and that's okay. But when you are able, when you are in community, then you are open and available to what is going to happen. We have gone off script several times because that is how the energy moves. Be open to that. That is authenticity. Ground in purpose and clarify the healing context. Now, some of this is repetition because that's how things settle, right? We must be clear on the what. What are we tending to? Where is the wound? Where did it come from? And why? Why now? Why here? Why in this moment? Build on relationships to attract community participation. Remember that I said positive energy illuminates. It is attracting. It grows. So as people begin to lean into this work, more people will find it attractive and find their way to it so that we can begin to expand how we do this. Those in the community must be firmly rooted in what is happening. Again, we're going to source the expertise, but it must be of the community, not for the community. Connect to positive resources. That goes back into tapping into those that are available to us, the expertise that are available to us, but it is not solely their work. They may help facilitate, guide, hold space, create a container for, but it is the work of the collective that supports and sustains the healing. Develop, adapt community healing agreements. The engagements must be determined by the collective. We cannot risk assuming that what worked yesterday is going to work for the people that show up today. We must agree every time on what we're doing and how we're doing it in order to move forward. I went in the wrong direction, didn't I? I sure did.
All good.
It's fine. I started at 6 and went down. You know, it's all good. Read on the other way up. We down at 4 now. Select an appropriate healing setting. Determine the space with intention. Where are you going to be? What does it look like? Where do you need to be? Do you need to be outside? Because sometimes energy, when it gets to moving, it needs a place to be, to go. It can't be held inside. Sometimes you got to open some windows, open some doors. Do you need low light, high light? Do you need candles? Do you need incense? Determine your space with intention. Now just reverse all that back in your mind and we're going to jump over to 7. Acknowledge points of departure and arrival, but leave space in between. We got to have a starting point and a stopping point. There is no silver bullet. We can't do it all at one time. We can't heal everything. You are not going to attend any of our workshops and come out fully healed. It does not work like that. There is a process. So you've got to leave some space. We have to know where we're starting and where we're going, but there's got to be some flexibility. Remember, the commitment to the present. You may not get through everything, and then you come back and we do it again, a shared experience. Engage in ritual practices and procedures. Following ritual procedures, it shifts the collective shared experience. It redefines the shared experience. It creates an openness to recreate what we are sharing. If we come in a space wounded and we acknowledge our wounds, we get an opportunity by way of the process of ritual to leave this space collectively changed. We have to open that portal. We have to commit to the fidelity of the process. And take care of yourself at the end. Where are you at the end, you collectively? Do a body scan. Check in with yourself. Put your feet on the ground. Put your feet in some soil. Ground yourself. Acknowledge where you are at the end as well. Tending to that, because things come up when we're healing. When you peel back an onion, there are other layers. And there are some other tears underneath those layers. We must tend to those spots, but we have to acknowledge them and understand that it is okay. As things come up, they're ready to shift. So see where you are at the end of a process. Bring yourself back into a whole and collective space. Remember that in this work, we are in fact whole and safe, especially as we do it together.
Ashe. So we were going to tell you some stories about the applications of this work, about community healing in response to organizational transformation, about community healing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, about community healing in response to systemic state violence, about community healing in response to a wounded and wounding church, about community healing in response to educational dysfunction. Because we wanted you to understand that even though the contexts are different, the work is still essential. So we don't believe that there is any context in which community healing is not useful. We believe that it enhances and enables whatever the work is in whatever setting you find yourselves, because it tends to the well-being of the collective and the people within it. But we don't necessarily have so much time for all the stories. So we'll see. What we're going to do is we're going to take a pause, and we're going to invite your questions and comments. And if there's room enough later, we might share a little bit about our specific experiences in the variety of contexts and settings and in response to different kinds of problems and challenges. But we want to open up the floor right now for question and comment.
And the online.
Oh, and online. Is someone checking online? Okay, so if you see questions. Okay, fantastic.
Hello.
Do us a favor, if you're going to ask us questions or make comments, tell us who you are. We want to know who we're in conversation with.
All right. My name is Clarissa, and I am a clinical mental health graduate student here at Webster. And first of all, I wanted to make a comment about your use of the word witch earlier, describing your elders and ancestors as, you said, women who know their powers are demonized, and so you call them witches. And that word came to my mind this morning when I was getting ready, and so that's now the vibe that I'm going to go with for the rest of the day. So my question is actually, so I was hoping to get a little bit of an elaboration or explanation on the remark about self-care, since I'm a mental health counseling student, and so at the mention of self-care, like my antennas went up. So you said self-care in a context that's perennially endangering people.
Yeah.
Could you just give a couple, perhaps, examples of those contexts and of alternatives to those contexts?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. So what did I mean when I said that? I meant that our efforts to care for and love ourselves are extraordinarily important. And they're extraordinarily important because I see them both as efforts that support our evolution and revolution. evolution and revolution, so that loving ourselves, and I go deeper, self-care is an expression of self-love, right? And efforts to love ourselves in contexts that don't love us are radical acts. They are radical acts of affirmation and protest. Of affirmation first for us, and of protest to environments that can't see us for who and what we really are. And so when we engage in efforts that deepen our love of ourselves, and there are many, where we tell our truths, where we affirm our right to be unmolested in the world, where we authentically express ourselves without mask, if and when it's safe. Did you hear that part? Because mask actually is a survival mechanism, right? That when we do these things, when we are willing to embrace the alienated parts of ourselves, the parts of ourselves that we demonize, shun, and shame, and when we say there's room at the table for more of me, that helps to grow me. And so it is evolutionary, helps to deepen my understanding of myself and my experience of my own power, right? My own power to define who and what I am and my place in the world. And it is revolutionary because it offers a contradiction to oppressive systems that would flatten me and my sense of self. All oppressive systems have at their nature a categorical no. That is what all oppressive systems do. They issue a no. They take that which is multidimensional and juicy and they flatten it into something that can be controlled and exploited. Doesn't matter the oppressive system. It's all the same stuff. And so when I explore and experience more of the dimensions of me, when I reclaim more of the dimensions of me, I am engaged in holy resuscitation. I am standing in the thickness of my being where my power lies. And that's revolutionary because it counters the categorical no of oppressive systems with a radical yes to my own being. This is essential work. It's essential work. But I'm saying that when my radical yes keeps encountering, you ain't shit. Why are you here? You don't matter. Right? When my radical yes gets met by a police officer who puts a gun to my head, which is the experience of my beautiful husband, there are ways that I'm still endangered, that my well-being is still compromised. I am well, but not as well as I could be. So my point was, we have to do the work on the core and on the conditions. And community healing tends to both, because how we've gone about this work historically has been as separate areas of work. You go to the therapist over here to do the core work, or to the minister over here to do core work, and you go to the streets to do protests. Or you go into the legislative halls, right, to challenge systems and structures. And I'm saying that beyond that dichotomy, there's something else. So we need disciplines and practices that support us in both doing core work and doing conditioned work, because transformed people transform systems. Does that answer you? Okay, very good.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
I have so many questions.
Tell us your name.
My name is Dana.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to say how proud I feel to see a bunch of you looking like me sitting up there. Very proud.
Ashe.
So, well, one of my questions is, I heard you say earlier, you talked about transformation, and are we saying that our trauma is passed down generationally based on what of our experiences as parents, whether we know it or not? Some of that comes up and out.
Yes.
And then my other question is this a program that pushes into places like schools and other organizations, or is it something that you have to sign up for? I was just curious because I was thinking about, when you all were talking, I was thinking about how one of the traumas I feel like we suffer as a community, as a cultural community, is not being able to raise our children how we, in the past, were able to raise our children, and because of rules and laws that were placed upon us, or ideas that
Yes.
did not align with people of other color, we were forced to transform how we raised our children, which now has, and so how do we go about healing that in our community?
Yes. I'm going to let some of my other colleagues speak on this, but yes, you are right that we inherit more than our eye color, more than our skin color, right? More than our phenotypes, right? So epigenetics often talks about the ways in which our genes express, often being shaped by the experiences that we have had compounded through generations. Right, so there's a whole body of knowledge and a field of study around how we inherit, right, many of the pains of those who came before us. Remember, if we don't heal it, we what? We spread it. And we often spread it to those who are closest to us, including our children, who then have that as their basis and often do what? Spread it. Right? And then you got into talking about, Black parents in some ways, or parenting in some ways. And, I experienced that. I believe that the oppression of children is the oppression on which all other oppressions sit. Y'all ready? The oppression of children. Right? And I recognize that in this culture, in this context called the United States of America, that Black parents are often the first police of Black children in order to ensure their survival. We have to police their bodies and their minds. We have to teach them, put your head down, don't speak back, don't da-da-da-da-da. And we will often harshly reprimand them. But where did that come from? Where did that come from? It is a survival mechanism. And in fact, I want you to hear me when I say this, that all oppressive systems require those they target to police themselves. So often, where do women get their sense of sexuality and identity policed? By moms, by aunties, by cousins, by grandmothers. And this was a useful survival mechanism. Let me teach you to put a dime between your knees and close them. Why? Because I understand that you live in a world that would exploit your sex, that would take from you something that is a gift. And so if I can teach you to be virtuous, maybe I can keep you from being violated. Right? Come on now. Come on. This is how it works. This is how it works. So my experience of patriarchy, my first experience of patriarchy, may not be a man, it may be grandma.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
This is why we have to heal it. Because if we don't heal it, we spread it. And it's why we have to not just be fault finding around it. Grandma learned it from somewhere. Grandma's giving me the best medicine she can give me to help me survive in a world that does not love Black girls. That didn't love her. Right? So, blessings upon grandma. But this is what we're dealing with. Right? This is what we're dealing with. This is why interventions that only stay at the surface, while useful, are not sufficient. Y'all got stuff?
No, because we need to get another question. However, to the second part of your question, what we're saying is that the field of community healing has a place in every place.
Yes.
So whatever your context is, there's healing to be had.
Yes.
So if that's in the communal setting, if that's in the church, if that's in the school, if that's in the workplace, everywhere. All right, let's move on.
Plug, though, there is an invitation at the end to stay connected with us and the work that we do.
Yes,
so that you
yes,
can
yes.
continue to partner with us as we do more, as we hold our workshops, as we do healing sessions where you can then be a part of it. We invite the community to be a part of the work as we move forward. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And you can see we're in all different contexts. So this work is, like she said.
Wherever humans are, there's an opportunity.
There you go. Love it.
We had another question out here, and then we got one on the screen.
Yes.
Do you want to do the screen?
No, come on.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brianna. I'm actually a counselor. I work in high schools. I'm a therapist after hours, but I have a lot of questions. So everything you guys said resonated with me. I love healing work. I think it's uber important, and we all need to be doing it every day. But my challenge, I guess, right now, and the question, or the word that you said about like depletion. I feel the work that I do, especially working with high school students, is super, super important. I actually worked at Normandy, so I went from Normandy to now Kirkwood High School, which is a complete just culture shock and change in so many different ways for me as a staff member. But for my students, in thinking about healing, and we do group, I work in the alternative school, actually. So there's even more healing that needs to occur with the families, not just the kids, but combating this feeling of depletion and the responsibility that I have to these kids and to my community, but then feeling like I'm the only one and the only person of color in my environment or in my place that I work, or the students I work with, keeping from, and all the stuff that I have to heal with personally, I guess, just keeping from getting discouraged because, the kids are not always there with you and they don't understand how important it is, and then trying to convince them or convince everyone around you that it's important. I guess my question would be like, what do I do, or what are suggestions or things that you guys could help me to think about pushing this initiative and pushing this healing work, or things that would help to bring the kids where I am, and then again pushing it into their families, because I think it stops. There's like a hard stop after we leave the school because there's so much again that compounds on them at home. So, and I'm happy to know that you guys are willing to work with us, because I was definitely going to come and talk to you after your presentation. But
So,
yes.
I think the short answer to your question is we are not only unwell, but our systems are unwell.
Yeah.
And so what you are talking about is not just you and or the students, it's about our schools that have not provided sufficient resources that allow for you and students to be cared for and be educated at the same time. And so we place this false emphasis around education, and I say false because there is no education when we are unwell. And so the work there is to shift that entire system. That's a lot of work, girl, okay? So we're gonna talk offline.
I think there's another part of it also, like, we say to do this work, we must do this work, right? Yeah. There is some self-care, some self-love, some self-healing that must also be done, where then you are finding a community to be absorbed in. Because when we work with youth, man, if it does not pull at the heart, at the core of who we are, because that is what's next, right? So when you do that kind of work, having a community that understands where you are, that can feed you and pour into you when you are approaching limits of depletion, that can keep you from being in that space, becomes important, so that you then have the effort and the energy to go back and even identify the folk to help you rah the system.
Yes.
We got to get you into some community to pour into you.
That's it.
One of the ways that we've addressed this is I specifically work with educators and in the educational system with educators, students, parents, all stakeholders really. But I was holding racial affinity groups. So I invite Black educators to come to the space and we have conversations. And without a shadow of a doubt, every time we do that, what happens is one educator starts crying because of everything that you were just talking to. They feel alone, they feel isolated, they're the ones doing this work, they're getting pushed back, they have to navigate all of the racial politics, they have to teach twice, teach the curriculum, whatever they're teaching, teach the other educators how not to be racist. And so what we do is we actually provide space to support those educators. We can definitely talk more about that, but if you look at liberatedgenius.com, there's a space, a tab, it's called Directory. That's liberatedgenius.com. Look under the tab Directory, and there's a report I did about racial affinity groups across the United States, and even as far as London, I believe. And what support can look like. And there also are a whole directory of organizations that are for racial affinity groups. That's just one start.
We're at the end. If you can get us back to our deck just so that we can go to our last slide. So Brianna, there are lots of supports, but hear us when we say we want you to be in community, right? It's a lot to carry. Community healing work is community work. Heroic individual effort will never be sufficient, ever, ever. Heroic individual effort will never be sufficient. And I know you're fierce, but this is when we understand the distinction between our work and our workload. Yes. Right? We have some real constraints around our workload. And if we don't acknowledge that, we'll be flat on our backs, unable to do the work.
That's right.
Right? So, if you're interested in more, you can visit what you see in blue.
sites.google.com/rebellion.com/balm. The point is, go there, sign up, we're gonna stay in touch.
Right. You'll get the starter healing guide. And of course, you can find us at info@InPower Institute. You can email us at info@InPowerInstitute.com. You can come to the website, www.InPowerInstitute.com. Everything is in the midst of being changed, though. We're putting up a whole new line of offerings. So stick with us, and you'll see by the end of this month, a whole lot of new stuff. And you can follow us on social media. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Woo, man. I think we all just took in powerful messages that will stick with us for a long time to come. Thank you, Rebeccah, and to the InPower team. Our keynote guest, one-time Olympic Gloria Hernandez, joined us last night for a powerful and candid discussion. In case you missed it, you can still catch a session virtually through our registration platform that we will send out an email. We've just tweaked that, but we'll send out an email with access and information on how to access all of our sessions. Lori's visit to Webster is a timely reminder that this year marks the 50th anniversary of the passage of Title IX. This landmark legislation has impacted the lives and opportunities available to millions of girls and women since 1972, including our athletes here at Webster. And our women athletes are certainly making the most of those opportunities. And if you've been around campus or followed some of the local news, you know that our women's basketball team was undefeated and champions. And they will be competing in the NCAA championship this upcoming Saturday. Our women's volleyball, softball, soccer, track and field, cross country, and tennis teams are shining this year as well. If you'd like to join us in paying tribute to this milestone anniversary, you can make a gift in support of Webster's women's athletic program. You can easily do so by scanning the QR code on page 1 or looking at the leaflets at your table. Those of you all who are virtual, you can find it in our digital program. We're going to take a quick break, and so grab a quick bite, replenish yourselves, and we'll see you here at 12:30. Thank you.